By the time I reached the front of the line, there was only one parking space left. I eased my old sedan into it, shut off the engine, and looked at the handwritten sign taped to the windshield of the luxury SUV beside me. Rezal for homeowner, he smiled. That was strange, because I was the homeowner, or at least, I had been when I left that morning. The annual Maple Ridge neighborhood block party only happened once a year. Every driveway was full. Kids chased each other through sprinklers. Neighbors grilled steaks. Music drifted from portable speakers. I grabbed the homemade peach pie I'd promised to bring and walked toward my house. Halfway up the driveway, a teenage volunteer wearing an event badge stepped in front of me. "Sir, I'm sorry. This house is for invited guests only," I laughed. "Good. I live here." The poor kid looked embarrassed. He checked the clipboard again. "I'm really sorry, but Mrs. Pierce specifically told us not to let you inside." I blinked. "What?" He pointed toward the backyard. "She said if an older gentleman claiming to be her husband showed up, we should call security." For a moment, I honestly thought someone was playing a practical joke. Then I heard applause. Everyone in the backyard had gathered near the patio. My wife, Diane, stood on the deck holding a champagne glass. She raised it high. "I'd like to thank all of you for celebrating my fresh start." People cheered. She smiled wider. "My biggest problem finally moved out today." More laughter. Someone shouted, "Congratulations." Then, she spotted me standing near the driveway. Her smile didn't disappear, it grew. She lifted her glass toward me. Perfect timing. I was just telling everyone that some people refuse to accept when they're no longer wanted. The crowd slowly turned. 30, maybe 40 neighbors, every face looking at me, some confused, some uncomfortable. My daughter Rachel stepped beside Diane. She crossed her arms. "Dad, don't embarrass yourself. You heard Mom. You don't live here anymore." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" She reached into her purse, pulled out my house keys, and tossed them onto the lawn. "They don't work." Diane laughed. "I changed every lock before lunch." Then she took one slow sip of champagne. "If you're tired, sleep in your car, old man." The neighborhood fell silent. Nobody expected her to say it, not even the people standing beside her. I looked down at the useless keys lying in the grass, then back at the front door, brand new electronic lock, security cameras. Even the garage keypad had been replaced. She hadn't acted out of anger. She had planned every detail for weeks, maybe months. A man from the neighborhood association walked over awkwardly. "Harold, maybe tonight isn't the best time." I nodded politely. "You're right, it isn't." I bent down, picked up my keys, picked up the untouched peach pie, turned around and walked back toward my car. No shouting, no begging, no threats. Just silence. As I opened the driver's door, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally I ignored unknown numbers. This time, I answered. "Mr. Pierce?" "Yes. My name is Elena Brooks. I'm calling from Ashcroft Capital. We've been trying to reach you all afternoon." I frowned. "I think you have the wrong person." "I don't believe we do. We're calling regarding the controlling voting shares registered under your name." I froze. "What voting shares?" There was a brief pause. "Mr. Pierce, you are still listed as the majority voting shareholder of Hawthorne Residential Holdings." I looked back across the street, at my wife, at my daughter, at the neighbors celebrating what they believed was the end of my story. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "What exactly does Hawthorne Residential Holdings own?" The woman answered calmly. "The entire Maple Ridge development, including the land beneath your house." For the first time that evening, I smiled. Not because I'd won, because I suddenly realized my wife had made one catastrophic mistake. She threw me out of a house without ever checking who actually owned the ground it was built on. I didn't drive away. I drove exactly 3 houses down, parked beneath a row of oak trees, and called the number back. "Mr. Pierce, are you somewhere private?" Elena asked. "I am now." "Good. There are several documents that require your approval before Friday. I think you should start from the beginning." She hesitated. "I assumed your family had already explained everything." "My family hasn't explained much of anything lately. 5 years earlier, when I sold Pierce Modular Construction, the buyers didn't purchase every asset. They only purchased the operating company. The real estate had been separated into a different corporation years before the sale. That corporation, Hawthorne Residential Holdings, owned commercial land, several apartment developments, and one unfinished neighborhood project called Maple Ridge, the neighborhood where I now lived. I remembered signing the restructuring documents. I simply hadn't thought about them since. The company was professionally managed. Quarterly reports arrived. I skimmed them, signed what needed signing, and went back to enjoying retirement. Apparently, that was about to change. Elena continued. We're finalizing negotiations with Brookfield Communities. They want to purchase Maple Ridge. I don't. Silence. I'm sorry? I said I don't want to sell. She sounded genuinely surprised. The preliminary agreement has already been approved. Approved by whom? The board. What board? The development board. I laughed quietly. There are only 5 directors. Correct. And who holds 51% of the voting shares? Another pause. You do, so nothing has been approved. Not until I say so. Across the street, music grew louder. More neighbors arrived carrying gifts. Someone had hired a live jazz band. My wife had turned my expulsion into a celebration. She believed the house was finally hers. She had no idea the developers she'd been secretly speaking to for months had never actually needed her signature. Only mine, as if reading my thoughts. Elena asked, Mr. Pierce, have you had a chance to review Mrs. Pierce's redevelopment proposal? I frowned. What proposal? This time. She became silent, the kind of silence professionals make when they realize they've accidentally revealed confidential information. I think we've misunderstood the situation. I think we have. Mrs. Pierce met with Brookfield representatives twice. She presented landscaping ideas and renovation concepts. I assumed the two of you were working together. I slowly leaned back in the driver's seat. Diane hadn't locked me out because she wanted a divorce. She locked me out because she believed removing me from the house would make me irrelevant before the sale. 40 minutes later, I was sitting inside Hawthorne's headquarters. Elena greeted me personally. She couldn't have been older than 35, sharp suit, no wasted words. She led me into the executive boardroom. The city skyline filled one wall. In the center of the table sat a large architectural model, Maple Ridge. Only, it didn't look like the neighborhood anymore. The houses were gone. In their place stood luxury condominium towers, retail spaces, underground parking, walking paths. I immediately recognized my property. It wasn't marked as Lot 17 anymore. It was labeled Phase 1 Entrance Plaza. I looked at Elena. My house? She nodded. The corner lots are essential, so the rumors were true. What rumors? Developers have been knocking on doors for months. They have, but nobody accepted. I smiled faintly, because they couldn't. Elena opened another folder. Inside were copies of emails, meeting schedules, Protry surveys. Then one photograph caught my attention. Diane, standing beside Brookfield executives, smiling, shaking hands. The date was almost 4 months old. 4 months. She had been planning my removal for at least 4 months. Not during an argument, not after a disagreement. Months, every conversation, every fake smile, every anniversary dinner, every I love you, performed while she quietly prepared to erase me from my own home before leaving. I asked Elena one question. If Brookfield can't buy Maple Ridge, what happens? She smiled for the first time. They don't have another entrance. The entire $200 million redevelopment collapses. I looked through the boardroom window toward the city, somewhere across town. My wife was probably telling neighbors she'd finally won. She had no idea. She hadn't locked an old man out of his house. She had accidentally locked herself inside the single property that no one could legally touch without the man she had just thrown away. I didn't call Diane. I didn't send a lawyer's letter. I didn't even tell her I knew. People reveal far more when they think they're still in control. So I checked into a modest business hotel 10 minutes away. The next morning, I watched everything unfold from a conference room inside Hawthorne's headquarters. One wall was nothing but security monitors. Not hidden cameras, construction cameras, traffic cameras, survey cameras. Every entrance into Maple Ridge had been recorded for years because of the pending redevelopment. Around 10 o'clock, a black Mercedes pulled into my driveway. 3 men climbed out, expensive suits, leather portfolios, Brookfield executives. Diane welcomed them like royalty. Coffee, fresh pastries, smiles all around. She walked them through the house, pointing at walls and windows as if she were already conducting the sale. Rachel joined them carrying rolled-up decorating plans. Everyone looked pleased, until one executive asked a simple question. "When will Mr. Pierce be joining us?" Diane laughed. "He won't. We're separated. I'll handle everything." The executive stopped writing. "I'm afraid that won't be possible." Her smile weakened. "My attorney says the divorce paperwork is straightforward. This isn't about divorce. It's about ownership." She frowned. "I own the house." "No, you occupy the house." The atmosphere changed instantly. Back at Hawthorne, Elena muted the live feed. They're about to have a very uncomfortable conversation. She handed me another folder. This is what Mrs. Pierce never knew. Inside were the original development agreements. Decades earlier, when I purchased the corner property, my attorney had insisted on adding a restriction. Not because anyone expected trouble, because commercial developers always think long-term. The restriction was simple: no transfer, no demolition, no redevelopment, no subdivision, without written approval from the majority shareholder of Hawthorne Residential Holdings, me. Even if I sold the house, that restriction remained attached to the land forever. It wasn't just a clause, it ran with the property. The security footage resumed. One Brookfield executive slid the paperwork back across Diane's dining table. "I'm sorry, we can't proceed." She stared at him. "What do you mean?" "We've invested nearly 2 years planning this project. So we just discovered your husband controls the only signature that matters." Rachel interrupted. "That's impossible." The executive calmly opened his laptop. "It isn't." He rotated the screen. A corporate ownership chart appeared. My name sat alone at the top, 51% voting control. Diane grabbed the laptop. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." She suddenly looked around the room, as though expecting me to walk through the front door. For the first time, she realized throwing me out hadn't made me powerless. It had made herself irrelevant. My phone rang. Diane. I let it ring. Agan, 23 missed calls before lunchtime. Then the messages started. "We need to talk." 5 minutes later, "This has gone too far." Another. "Please answer your phone." By evening, the messages sounded very different. Her old, "I'm sorry, can we fix this?" I read everyone. I answered none. The following afternoon, Brookfield requested an emergency meeting. Not with Diane, with me. 3 senior executives waited in the boardroom. The CEO stood as I entered. "Mr. Pierce, we owe you an apology." "You don't owe me one. We negotiated for months with someone who implied she had authority. I never authorized anyone." He nodded. "We understand that now." Then he surprised me. "We'd still like to buy Maple Ridge. I'm listening, but only if you remain our development partner." I looked out the window. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means we no longer want to replace the neighborhood." He spread new architectural drawings across the table. The luxury towers were gone. Instead, the plans preserved every existing home, added walking trails, a community medical clinic, a public park, and one protected green space surrounding the old maple tree behind my house, the very tree Diane had called just a tree. The CEO smiled. "Your refusal forced us back to the drawing board. And honestly, this neighborhood deserves better than what we originally planned." For the first time since sleeping in my car, I felt something other than anger. I felt possibility, because somewhere across town, my wife still believed she was fighting to get back into my house. She had no idea. The conversation had already moved far beyond the house. Now, she was about to discover what it costs to betray the one person standing between greed and a $200 million dream. The emergency meeting was held exactly 1 week later. Not at Hawthorne, not at Brookfield. It took place in the Maple Ridge Community Hall. Every homeowner had been invited. Nearly 200 people filled the room. Some came because they feared losing their homes. Others came because they'd heard rumors of a billion-dollar developer. And one person arrived believing she could still control the outcome: my wife. Diane walked in wearing a cream-colored designer suit. Rachel followed close behind. The moment Diane saw me sitting at the front table beside Brookfield's executives, she stopped walking. For a split second, she looked genuinely frightened. Then she recovered. She smiled at everyone in the room as though nothing had happened. The Brookfield CEO stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. For months, our company planned a complete redevelopment of Maple Ridge." Murmurs spread through the audience. He continued. "We intended to demolish every existing home. The room exploded with angry whispers, then he raised one hand. That plan has been permanently withdrawn. Silence. Instead, he unveiled a new presentation. Large screens lit up around the hall, walking trails, a new community health center, parks, renovated streets, protected green spaces, every existing homeowner keeping their property, no forced sales, no demolitions. Applause slowly filled the room, then became thunderous. The CEO smiled. This project only exists because one man refused to sacrifice an entire neighborhood for profit. He turned toward me. Mr. Harold Pierce. Every head turned. People I had lived beside for years suddenly began applauding. The elderly couple from across the street stood first, then another family. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet. I wasn't comfortable with applause. I never had been. But this wasn't really for me. It was for the neighborhood. Then Diane did something astonishing. She walked straight toward the microphone. "Excuse me. There has been a misunderstanding." The room grew quiet again. She looked directly at the audience. "My husband hasn't been feeling like himself lately." Rachel nodded beside her. "He's been making emotional decisions." I almost laughed. Even now, she still believed she could convince strangers I was incapable. The Brookfield CEO looked at her politely. "I'm sorry, and you are. I'm his wife." He nodded. "Mrs. Pierce, I'm aware, but Mr. Pierce is the majority shareholder. He alone has legal authority." She forced a smile. "I'm sure he'll reconsider." I finally stood. "No." One word, nothing more. The room became silent. I walked slowly to the stage, looked directly at Diane. "You threw me out of my own home. You told me to sleep in my car, in front of our neighbors. You celebrated before I had even left the street." She opened her mouth. I raised my hand. "You've spoken enough." Then I faced the audience. This community was never for sale. My signature wasn't something to be manipulated, and my marriage wasn't a business transaction. You could have heard a pin drop. 3 months later, the divorce was final. Diane received exactly what the law required, nothing more. The judge was particularly unimpressed after seeing evidence that she had changed the locks, denied me access to my own residence, and represented herself as having authority she simply didn't possess. Rachel moved into an apartment across town. She didn't speak to me for almost a year. Construction on the new community improvements began that autumn. The old maple tree remained exactly where it had always stood. Instead of becoming the entrance to luxury condominiums, it became the centerpiece of Maple Ridge Memorial Park. Children played beneath its branches every afternoon. A bronze plaque stood beside the trunk. It didn't mention my name. It simply read, "Some things are worth more than the highest offer." One rainy Saturday, almost 18 months after the divorce, I was trimming flowers beneath that same tree when I heard footsteps. Rachel. She looked older, not physically, emotionally. She stood quietly for several moments. "I drove by here last week. I saw families having a picnic." I nodded. "It's a good park." She swallowed. "Mom still says you ruined her life." I smiled gently. "No, she ruined the version of life she wanted." Rachel looked down. I believed her. "I know. I helped her. I know." Tears rolled down her face. "I kept thinking you were fighting over a house." She looked around the park. "I never realized you were protecting an entire neighborhood." I placed the pruning shears on the bench. When people become greedy, they stop seeing who gets hurt. They only see what they want. She stepped forward, then hugged me for the first time in years. She hugged me like a daughter, not someone choosing sides. Every spring, the neighborhood now holds its annual block party beneath that old maple tree. Families bring homemade food. Children ride bicycles through the park. New homeowners hear the story from older neighbors, not about a divorce, not about money, but about one stubborn old man who refused to let greed erase a community. Sometimes justice isn't watching the people who hurt you lose everything. Sometimes it's watching hundreds of families keep everything they love because you refuse to surrender yours.